Welcome, Dufferin-Caledon, to our next session of That Thing Called Life. Today, Kelli and I, we have some special guests that we're going to be introducing you to a little bit later on. But we're going to be dealing with coping with grief, and we want to talk about what grief is and the stages that you go through and how we can help ourselves and other people through it. So some of the things when we talk about grief, Kelli, the definition of grief, when you think about what grief is,
right?
What do you think it is?
Well, I think, to be honest with you, I think, there's probably a standard Webster's dictionary version of what it is, but I think it's really different for everybody. It's the loss of, going through the loss of something, someone. I know we wanted to touch on the fact that, when we hear grief, we just automatically jump to the loss of a person.
Right.
But we really need to begin to understand that grief is just, it's so much more than that loss. It's, the loss of a job, the loss of a relationship, a loss of a friendship, loss of, your hearing or your eyesight, or, we recently had a girlfriend who, thank God, survived breast cancer, but she had to go through that transition of losing that part of her body. And so we need to understand that grief isn't just pigeonholed for death.
Right.
There's a bunch of different ways that we grieve, and I think a lot of times we grieve and we don't even know we're doing it.
It's interesting because there's a gentleman called William Bridges that talks about the various transitions that we go through. And there's lots of sayings out there, and one of the sayings that has stuck with me in terms of change, because this is a change, right? It's an emotional piece. There's an emotional piece to it, but there's a change that has to happen.
Yeah. And
it's usually the ending of something, and then there's this gray period. In Bridges' model, he talks about the ending, a neutral zone, and then a new beginning.
Right.
And so when you think about whether it's the death of a loved one or changes at work or losing a job, there's the end of something, but then there's this gray kind of fuzzy period where it's not well defined. And how do we get through that? There's a lot of emotions mixed up with that as well until we get to a point where we can actually see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when we go through this kind of model that's been laid out, it really is just a way of putting kind of boxes around some of the things that we experience and some of the changes that we have to go through. And to me, it's really about dealing with a different way of doing things, because we have to get into a new routine, a new pattern, right? Someone has gone, someone is, whether it's through death or whether it's they've left. How do we cope and how do we deal with this new way of being?
Yeah.
So the grief to me is associated with a whole bunch of things in terms of the loss of something.
Oh, sure it is. I mean, just as you were speaking there, I was thinking about how I had been with IBM for 14 years.
Yep.
And IBM, it was a great company to work for. I loved every second of it, but it really became my whole life, because at that time I was a single lady, and I really kind of threw myself into my career back then in my early 20s, 30s. And when I walked away, when I accepted that package and walked away, I remember leaving the building going, yes, like a new start. Right. And then about 2 days later, I went, holy, I'm no longer Kelli Collins from IBM.
Right.
Now what am I? And I'm scared, because now I just don't know what lies ahead. And you go from being in this corporate environment and your regular routine and process, and you're up and you're showered and you're this and you're that, and then all of a sudden it's all gone.
Yeah. And even as simple as when I was with IBM with you, when we went to the working at home model.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that's a transition too.
Yeah.
So something as simple as that, we think it's
the
simple.
social connection that's then gone.
That how do you then operate in this environment where you're sitting in your home office and you still have to talk to people and stay connected, and get out of your pajamas
and
every day.
I was going to say, you buy a bunch of yoga pants and T-shirts, but no, and to stay engaged in that same sort of, that same passion and that same connection that you have with everybody, right?
But
so
there's a grieving that goes with all of that in terms of, okay, so I've just spent 8 hours at my desk and really haven't interfaced physically with anybody.
Yeah, so the dog's still there. And
it's a new way of, to me it is a new way of doing things and the new patterns that have to emerge from all of it.
Yes, and I think, it's funny because as we were preparing for the show and I was thinking about certain areas of my life that I've dealt with from a grief perspective, I was thinking, did I get better each time? Like, did I learn from every grieving experience? And the truth is I haven't. Like, I don't know necessarily that with a new loss that is inevitable coming down the road in whatever way, shape, or form it is, will I ever be well equipped to do, like, okay, so now I'm in anger and now I'm here, and I know you bounce all over, the Kubler-Ross sort of dynamic where you bounce all over, and I get that, but, just when I thought I had this grieving thing under control, it comes up and slaps you across, a song comes on, or you smell something, and you think, geez, like...
Well, it's interesting, and we'll talk to one of our guests about this too, in terms of how do we cope, but one of the things when you're talking about, there's things that are going to bring you right back. We tend to forget each time that there's emotions attached to all of this, and we need to process those emotions. In a lot of cases, we hold them down and actually don't process them sometimes, and that gets us into a little bit of a funky place.
Well, I'm wondering, it's a good point you make, because when we have Jordan, who's coming on, who's been on our other show, another one of our more, difficult conversations that we've had, I want to ask her about, like, do your, that muscle memory?
Yeah.
Like, do our emotions sometimes work the same way, where it's just there's a trigger and there's nothing that's going to stop it, it's going to come up. And by the way, what should we do about it?
Right.
Like, I had this wonderful therapist that helped me through some of my grieving issues, and he said, let it out. Like, if it's coming up, it's because it needs to get out. Don't suppress it, feel it, go with it. And that was instrumental for me, because when we were talking before, I was telling you about how the biggest mistake I've made with grief was the loss of a parent, was the loss of my father. And I hung on to the pain of the grief and clung to it with dear life, because I felt like if I could feel something, he still mattered. He was still somehow with me. And so I confused the pain with
him being there with his presence.
Yeah, like letting the pain go, I thought was then finally saying goodbye. And what I learned was letting the pain go brought him back to me in spades. I mean, I got to love him and enjoy him and the memories and pictures and all that kind of stuff. And that was 17 years that I hung on to that. And, that to me, now when I look back, I think, gosh, what a waste. I wish something had resonated with me sooner. And I would say from that lesson, I have learned. I have learned that I have to purge and process out feelings, and no matter what it is, whether it's death or, the loss of my relationship with my sister or whatever.
But I think you bring up a good point in terms of you got through it and you processed it in your time. Not everybody processes. I know, even though there's models out there about change and grief and dying and all of that stuff that says you have to go through these stages. You go through the stage, but then you bounce right back again, like you said earlier. And there's no set time limit to go through this, and I'm sure Jordan is going to talk to this when we get her on here too. There's no set time limit for people to go through this stuff. So, okay, I'm going to be here in 6 months, and then 6 months I'm going to be here, and then a year I'm going to be here. I don't think, and I think we get hard on ourselves because we expect ourselves in a 2-month, 6-month period to be able to, okay, I'm done, I'm over it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's tough. We talk all the time in our coaching practice about the change of perspectives. Right. But when you are in something deep and it's in your bones, the perspective is just very much siloed, and that the pain that comes with grief it can be paralyzing. Mm-hmm. And you can certainly feel that there's no way beyond it, and the truth is that with every little piece, every little step, every little lesson learned, you can get there. It's difficult. Grieving is the most painful thing I've ever done,
but you have to do it.
It's not been something so instrumental in my life,
and it's not something that you can jump over.
No,
I'm not going to do that.
No, right.
You have to allow yourself to mourn
yes.
the loss.
Yeah.
Even at work, you have to, because we change things at work on a daily basis. You have to mourn what was, mm-hmm. so that you can move on to what will be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. You have to make room.
Yeah.
Your soul can only take so much, and if it's burdened by, and by the way, unfortunately with life, you could be grieving 4 different things at once, and yes. It could be a person, it could be 2 people, it could be a relationship, you could be going through divorce, and then a parent passes, or
or you lose a pet.
Well, don't even. I'm not going there with you today. But yeah,
well, we have those people that are pet lovers. That's something that we don't look forward to, but it happens.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because you go in expecting the grief. You would go in knowing the grief.
It's going to happen.
You do.
And you're still not prepared.
Never.
So I don't think you can ever prepare. Even you go through many, many different changes along the way. You're never prepared to deal with the loss of something.
No, it's when I was thinking about my most latest sort of what I've had to grieve, it was the relationship with my sister. Mm. And interestingly enough, what made me sort of process it out quicker than I ever have was not because I don't like my sister or I don't have love for my sister. It's that it was the acknowledgement of the fact that we were not good in each other's life. So first of all, we don't get along, and that's okay. And I'm really different than she is, and she's really different, and we're oil and water, and it's okay. It doesn't make her wrong. It doesn't make me wrong. Right. But where I was able to get with acceptance was, but we're not good for each other. So if we love each other, then we need to be apart.
And that's okay.
Yeah. And then I came out of the grief. Like the anger was gone and the sadness was gone. Right. And so I just think, I think we're talking about it because it's a subject that doesn't get spoken about a lot. I had mentioned on a previous show when my mom passed away.
Yeah, we're gonna have to wrap it up for a bit.
Yes,
Kelli,
I know. I'm sorry.
We're gonna take a break, but then we're gonna come right back with a special guest that we want to talk to. Well, I don't think you'll be here. I think it's just me and her.
I'm leaving you.
Okay, so we'll be right back. Welcome back, Dufferin-Caledon. We're here talking with one of our special guests today, Rena Ferguson. Rena is actually responsible for making Kelli look gorgeous on every show that we've done so far. So she is an amazing hairdresser. She puts Kelli's makeup on. It just makes her look fabulous. Fabulous.
Super fun.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. It's good fun.
So we're going to talk to Rena about her story and her story of coping with grief and what she's gone through over the last little while. You heard Kelli and I talk about the change and what that is. So why don't you tell us what you've been going through, or what you have gone through, and how you've coped?
Well, I think what Kelli was talking about is true. I think you grieve in many different ways, whether it's a loss of a relationship, a loss of a parent, loss of a job. I've gone through all those things. But to me, all those grieving was completely different. Like, each experience was different, and the one that hit home to me is I lost my father about 4 years ago. And it's been an interesting path to take, because at the same time, you're watching the grief of your mother, the grief of my sisters, I have 2, and watching how they're grieving, and you're being supportive to them as well as trying to support yourself, right? And a lot of times I was very much told that sometimes you can't help other people in their grief. Like with my mother in particular, I'm grieving a loss of a father, but she was grieving a loss of a husband after 40 years. So I can't compare my grief to her grief, because it's 2 different worlds. So, yeah, so that's kind of looking back on it, you were mentioning the bridge and then the gray area and then the new light. So being able to watch my mother over the last 4 years, she became a different person when Dad passed. So we were grieving the loss of a mother at the same time because she wasn't the person that we knew. She was someone completely different, and she wasn't that, you saw her weakness for the first time. You saw, her cry, a lot with coping, and then seeing, a year and a half later, her trying to figure out what's my life without my husband, what's my life without the world that I know, and then now seeing her like she's genuinely happy. Her family brings her the most joy. So going to Mom's for dinner brings her a lot of joy. So it's kind of...
You talked about helping her and helping yourself, and I think we get caught, particularly in that situation, in a kind of catch-22.
Right.
Because we can't be, and you said this, we can't be 100% for anybody else unless we're 100% for ourselves. So we have to go through that process as well. Mm-hmm. But you're expected to be strong. And I don't know where your birth order is in your family.
I'm in the middle.
You're in the middle?
Yep.
Usually middle people...
Suffers.
I know, I'm with you. I'm middle too. So, but usually they are the ones that are looked at as kind of the peacemakers and making everybody, and keeping harmony and all that stuff. And I find, as I have dealt with my older siblings and my younger siblings, it's very difficult because they look at you saying you're the strong one. And sometimes you don't want to be strong.
No, I mean... I'm the one that reminds my mom most of my father and some characteristics as well. We have inappropriate sense of humors. We don't really have a filter. So it kind of brings her joy, when I do that. Yeah. And I think that's, so it's funny. Well, in that situation, I find that it's hard not to be selfish in your own grief at the same time. Like, I know that sounds kind of weird, but like no one knows how you actually feel. In example, when Dad did pass, I had to go to work like 5 days later, where my 2 sisters got 2 months off to grieve because their work allowed them to have time with my mother, spending time with her, grieving through that period. And I had to go back to work and face life a little more sooner than maybe I would have liked to. So that kind of forced me to talk and deal with it with clients because that's what I do for a living. So for me, I got it out really quick. I didn't have 8 weeks to sit and just be quiet with my family. I had to go in and have my emotion on my sleeve and kind of do that with other people. So, which is not a problem.
How did other people react to you when you were like that?
They were super sad for you. So it's hard to be sad and then have people sad for you, because then you're like, okay, like you don't need to be sad for me. It wasn't your fault. Like you didn't do this to me. And I think the one thing that helps me the most in it is my dad didn't deliberately leave us.
It wasn't his choice.
It wasn't his choice. And so I feel blessed in a way that my dad had a heart condition. So he had his first heart attack around 32.
Oh, wow.
So I would have been, oh, goodness me, like 7, maybe 6. So I could have lost my father then. And then he had a second heart attack at 43. I was 17. Could have lost my father then, but I was 30. He built a salon for me. I had a gift. And I'm like, I got to be friends with him. So my grieving is more like I'm not sad about it. I'm like, I got so blessed to become friends with him. You know what I mean? So again, I just think every story is completely different.
How are you coping now?
I feel I have days where I truly miss him. His hands, where he got to fix everything that I couldn't fix. Our funny talks, like I said, we have the same sense of humor, so he kind of gets when I make a joke. There's little things, though, that bring me comfort. Like every time I hear Mustang Sally, it's my dad because he loved his Mustang and he put it in every time he went for a ride. My family finds that when we see random deer, because he loved deer and hunting, we get comfort. They're like, oh, look, a deer today crossing the road. So I find that that's little things like, and what I can take positively out of it is in the career that I am in, I can understand when other people go through it. A lot of times if you haven't experienced it, it's really hard to be in their shoes. So the fact that I have, and it's something that happens all the time, I can fully understand when someone comes in and says, I lost this, or I've been through this. I have the ability to have empathy with them.
We have this condition, us humans, to think that we're the only ones going through something like that.
Right.
So I think in a profession like yours, you get to spend some time with them, and it's. And I remember thinking about like the Old West and not in the Old West necessarily, but being a bartender and having people come to the bar and spill out their stories.
Right.
I think that must happen with what you do as well in terms of being able to relate. And I remember there was one time I had a friend who had just lost someone, and I said to her, "I understand how you feel," and she got really angry at me because she said, "You've never lost anybody in your life. How would you know how I feel?"
Right.
And I had to think about that for a bit, and I thought about, well, just because someone didn't die doesn't mean that I didn't lose someone.
Or it's not a different type of loss, right?
Right.
100%.
So when you look back at what your family has gone through, what have been the differences with how you mentioned about you having to get right back into the real world, where your sisters were able to take a little bit of time. What do you think was beneficial about either way? Or do you think there was anything?
I personally think my mom needed someone around 24/7 after everything had happened.
Yeah.
So it was a blessing that my two sisters got to take some time. They rotated in and out. They have their families. So we shifted for a bit, making sure that mom was never alone in the big house. I handled certain weekends when my sisters couldn't. But sometimes sometimes you don't grieve with other people.
Yeah.
So I think for me in particular, I mean, I had a good support system outside of my family as well. Like I have really good friends, and I had a good boyfriend, and they were helping me out. But I kind of grieve privately too. Like I'm a joker, so I'm gonna relieve my grief with cracking an inappropriate or funny joke, or laugh really hard and release it in a different way. Right. I think it's the only way I could have done it, because I wanted to go back to work. I was like, okay, I'm done being sad. Let's go do this.
Yeah.
Let's just address it head on.
It's really funny you say that, because when my dad passed away, I remember having a discussion with my mom about how none of us could fill the hole that he had left.
And you can't.
And I think she wanted that, but it was very difficult. My mom doesn't drive, so my dad drove all over the place and everywhere, and like the drop of a hat, they would get up and go. And so she expected us to pick that up after he had gone.
I mean, I look back on my mom, and if I can share a little bit there, is she had experienced a lot of grief at a young age. She lost her mom at 24 before, she had one kid. And then my dad lost his dad a couple years later. And then my mom's dad died when we were young. And then all of a sudden she's only 60, she's only 60. And then she loses her husband after 40 years.
Wow.
So, I mean, when I look at her, she's probably one of the strongest women I can imagine to look up to. Yeah. And if anything, you get your strength from that, because you're like, she's coping, she's doing it. She may not be coping the way I personally think she should have coped, but she did the best that she could. And all I know now is that she just wants to be surrounded by the one she loves, which is her family, and that makes her the happiest. Yeah. So to not provide that for her, I feel, would be an injustice.
Yeah, no,
right?
You want to be there. You want to be there for your family. It's
100%.
hard sometimes. It's hard being that strong all the time, right?
100%.
And it's also hard trying to understand some of the things that are communicated to us through a bunch of that stuff.
Right.
It's hard to get through all of that, right?
Yeah, and I think our family's doing pretty good. So we love each other. We know it's there. Whether there's severe hard times where you banter and you fight, I think there's that there's an underlying power of love that's under there that keeps you coming back for more fighting.
I like that. More fighting, because that's what families do, right? That's what we do.
Sorry, Mom.
That's the best part. That's the best part. So, you talked about hearing songs that bring you comfort and signs like the deer. Is there anything else?
Well, my mom made us these amazing teddy bears out of Dad's shirts.
Oh, wow.
So his plaid shirt he wore all the time, his red shirt he wore all the time, buttons off his shirt for the eyeballs, and then a tag that says for Grandpa Ferg, so it's kind of going to be inherited down to whatever child I have after that. So I have that bear that I look at every day, knowing if I wanted to grab it, it's made of Dad. And then my mom took the time to write out Dad's life story together, so we have a book that I can just go through and understand down east where Dad came from. So, I mean, I got a lot of it. Mom did that with her coping. She wrote out their story and gave it to all of us. Yeah. So
I have a friend who did that. They lost their father in like September, then they lost their mother the following August, and an aunt 3 weeks before the mother passed, and then there was a wedding supposedly a week after. And so for Christmas,
that's a lot.
that was a lot to take in.
Right.
And so for Christmas, one of the girls did books for, there was 5 sisters, and so 2 of them left pretty well at the same time. But they did the pictures and the stories, and it was just, it was phenomenal to sit down and look at, even for me, and I didn't know them when they were younger, but to go through that, because that's a piece of history. It's tangible, right? You can actually look at the pictures and the memories.
And I also get to learn a bit about my mom.
Yeah.
Like, she wrote their story that maybe you didn't know about, and you never really took the time to ask.
Yeah.
So.
And some of the memories she had that she gets to now share with you as she's going through this, and you can actually recognize.
And it was very healing for her to do.
I guess, it's quite powerful when we do something like that, and it's always there that we can go back to, and if we're feeling nostalgic in any way, or
I took a gander, take a read. It usually makes me cry, so I only do it at certain times.
Yeah. It's different. I mean, I really like the fact that you recognize that each one of your family has dealt with this in a different way, and will continue to deal with it in a different way. But that, I remember when we had a memorial for my dad, and the 4 of us got together, and that was quite interesting. About a year after he passed and stuff. So, okay, we're gonna stop. I'm gonna stop putting you through the ringer right now. So we're gonna take a break, and then we'll be right back with Kelli and Jordan.
Thank you.